I did get started on bulldozing the property this morning. While I was bulldozing the property, though, one of the hydraulic lines on the bulldozer blade blew up. It just completely just blew up, and it was oil was going everywhere. So I stopped bulldozing the property. And as of right now, the rental company is closed tomorrow, so I'll have to get in contact with them on Monday to get this all squared away. But the bulldozer, the hydraulic line on the bulldozer blew up, and so I got to get in contact with them about it. I did get started on it, and the whole idea of the bulldozing, the big idea of what am I doing with the bulldozer, is I am effectively just going to cut a path around the property. I will cut a clear-cut path around the entire fence line of the property, and then I'm gonna move a bunch of the dead trees. I'm gonna get all the dead trees piled up just get all the dead trees piled up and out of the way. And then here, maybe in about a month or so, here in about 2 or 3 weeks, I will be herbiciding the property. So I will herbicide the property to get rid of the vegetation. Like you see all this stuff over here, all this stuff on the ground right here. This is just vegetation, and herbicide will take care of that. So the big idea with the bulldozer is to just go around the entire property one time, and to just cut a clear-cut path around the entire property so that I can walk the fence of the property, and then pile up all the dead trees. So that's the big idea with the bulldozer. And I was doing that this morning, and I was cleaning up the pond, and one of the hydraulic lines exploded. Things are going okay, though. Things are going well. Here probably in about 2 weeks, I will start expanding the herd again. So within about 2 weeks, I will start re-expansion of the herd, and I will distribute the smaller animals out to the lease properties, and then I will take the bigger animals to the sale barn, and then I will take the money that I get from liquidating the bigger animals, and I will reinvest the money to buy myself a bunch of smaller animals, and I'm effectively good to go. Here in about maybe 3 weeks or so, the big idea right now is to just herbicide the properties. I'm not going to be planting any grass. I just don't have any reason to. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. As of right now, I just simply have so much land. I have so much land that it's not like the most important thing for me to get every single ounce of efficiency out of every acre of land. So, I'm just going to grow whatever I need, and then I'll let the cattle out on it, and I'm just going to grow whatever grows in. And the big idea is the herbicide that I like to use, the herbicide that I really like to use is Duracor. I use Duracor, and I do very well with Duracor. I really like that Duracor stuff. And the cool thing about Duracor is that because of the label of the herbicide, like when I go to the fertilizer yard, they will actually coat my fertilizer with the herbicide. So when I go through and I just fertilize my property, I can also herbicide the property at the same time. So it's very easy for me to do. And Duracor, it works very well. It's a slow-acting herbicide, but it does work very well on the wild vegetation, on just a bunch of vegetation. It works really good, and it keeps it doesn't damage the grass, and so that's very good about Duracor. But that's one thing about Duracor. One of the big benefits of Duracor is that because of the label, I'm not exactly sure what it has to do with the label, but the label of the herbicide allows people to coat fertilizer with that particular herbicide at the commodity yard. So if I go to the commodity yard and I say I want to buy 1 tonnage of fertilizer, and I will be utilizing this fertilizer at 200 pounds an acre, and I want to use this Duracor and coat the fertilizer for me, they will tell me they will do it for me, and then they will tell me at what setting do I need to utilize the broadcaster to get 200 pounds per acre, and then that will distribute the Duracor out over the field evenly as well. And that's a very effective way of herbiciding the field. And while I was bulldozing the property, I did find about 100 feet of fence. I have about 100 feet of fence that has just completely fallen over. The fence material is not damaged in any way. It's good fence material. It's not damaged, but the fence has fallen over completely. Like, I can just walk over it into the neighbor's field. It's just completely laid over. It looks like a giant tree at one point fell on it, and it just knocked a whole bunch of it over. And there's two areas where about maybe about 25 to 50, so it's about 50 to 100 acre of fence that's just completely fallen over. And I need to get that fixed before I put the cattle on the field. And so I'm gonna time everything. I'll get everything spaced out well. The whole thing about this upcoming week is that I really need to bulldoze as much land as I can. And this is also why it is so important for me to cut a path around the property so that I can check the fence. All right, I can check the fence, and if I had not checked the fence, I would have had 100 feet of just open fence. The animals could have just walked out of the field without any effort. Like, I could have just walked across the fence, and the fence was legitimately just like 2 inches off of the ground. It was borderline just completely on the ground. And I'm guessing that a tree took it out. A big tree took it out when it rained, and there was a big storm, and a big tree fell on it, and it just completely knocked out about 25 feet of fence. And so but that's the big idea. You have to have an idea of what's going on with the fence, or the cattle will get away. All right, the cattle will get away, and if I lost 20 cattle, that would have been a miserable situation. So I have to fix up that fence. I do have to get the bulldozer fixed up, and I can clear out the rest of the property, and then I'll effectively just be about good to go. And then the big idea is to just start reinvesting the money into growing my herd. I took a look at it, and I will probably I will make over $100,000 in the next 3 months. I will make over $100,000 in the next 3 months. I would anticipate that my herd grows from 35 to maybe 50, 55, maybe even 60 animals in the next 3 months. It'll be something like that. The big idea is to get myself to 60. All right, once I get to 60, I'll effectively be liquidating 10 animals every month, and I will still have 50 animals at home. And so, the whole thing about it is, I understand what is happening. I do very well for myself. I understand that I am making a lot of money. I am making a drastic sum of money. And the amount of money that I'm making is effectively going up on an exponential curve. I do anticipate that at some point, the cattle market will begin to cool. I do anticipate that will happen. But, realistically, if the cattle market starts to fall, in all honesty, the corn market will probably go up. And if the corn market goes up, the hay market will also probably go up. And at the end of the day, if the hay market goes up, it doesn't really matter what the cattle price is, because I have so much land area. I have so much land area that if it comes down to it, I can just grow hay and then have it baled by a custom baler. And then and a lot of these custom balers, if you look around, there are custom balers that will also buy the hay. So they will bale it for you, and then they will buy it from you, and then they will take it. They will take the hay. And so that's if when it happens, when the cattle market starts to cool, and the corn market will probably also go up at that point. I do anticipate that sometime between now and the next 3 years, the corn market will probably go up. It probably will. I think that a decent price for corn is about $4.80. That's what I see as a reasonable price as of right now. With corn prices where they are, and I've spoken about this. The corn market is in a very rough situation. Okay, the corn market is in a very rough situation. A lot of people right now probably, and just to put things in perspective, I didn't even bother baling hay this year. I figured I was gonna lose money baling hay, and a lot of people, when it's corn, it's different, right? When you have, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or whatever it may be acres of corn, you're going to have to harvest it. It's not like hay, right? Because hay, the thing about hay is that if I put my cattle on it, when I put my cattle on it, at least I make my money back. At least I've already made my profit. But if you're growing corn, you have to harvest that corn or you're just, it's not gonna be, you're not gonna be able to make any money on it at all, right? I mean, at all. You won't make anything on it. It will be a complete loss. And so it's a rough situation for the corn market. The corn market is in a very hard spot right now. I think that 480 is honestly a good price for corn. I think that 480 is a good price for corn. If corn goes over 5, that would be very good for the corn people. And but the cattle price will probably go down. Y'all can see the cattle messing with my truck, but I'm gonna see if I can. I don't want to blind them, but at that point, the cattle market will also probably cool. Okay, when the corn market starts to go up, the cattle market will start to go down. I call that the double whammy, and at some point that is going to happen. But even if that happens, I have so much land area that it doesn't matter. All right, if it comes down to it, I will legitimately just grow hay. I will just herbicide and fertilize more property, and I will just bale a bunch of hay. Okay, I will just bale a bunch of hay, and then I will sell the hay and make my $10 or $15 a bale. And at that point, it's whatever, right? Because my feed costs will go negative. The cost of gains will go negative. I can feed my cattle for free. It doesn't matter, all right? It doesn't matter. Right now, growing grass, but even right now, growing grass, it doesn't really cost. Growing grass, the cost of growing grass is very trivial. It's a very small amount of money. I mean, for me to grow enough grass to feed 35 500-pound cattle up to 800 pounds, for me to grow enough grass to do that, it costs about $400 a month, about 8 months out of the year, 7 months out of the year, 8 months out of the year, $350, something like that. That's what it costs me. All right, the cost of growing grass is very trivial, but that's also the thing, is that I'm not gonna go and grow myself 350 acres of hay. I'm not gonna go and grow 250 acres of hay for 200 cattle, right? I'm not gonna go and grow myself 250 acres of hay for 100 cattle. Why that would be 2.5 acres of grass per animal, right? I mean, why would I do that? That would be a waste of money. Realistically, maybe I'll grow 10 acres at a time. Maybe I'll grow 15 acres at a time, right? I'll grow 15 acres here, I'll grow 15 acres there, I'll grow 15 acres there, and then 15 acres over here. I'll grow 15 acres at a time. And 15 acres of grass will honestly be enough grass to feed maybe about 50, 75 cattle, something like that, depending on the rain. All right, depending on how much moisture I get. All right, very often moisture, rain, water is the limiting factor. All right, if I don't have enough rain, and if I don't have adequate temperature, if I don't have adequate warmth or coolness, right? If the temperature is not exactly ideal either, then the crop just won't grow very well. But if the weather is very good, if the weather is very optimal, then I can get a massive amount of biomass accumulation in a very small acreage. I could get a lot of biomass accumulation in a very small amount of acreage. And so it'll all vary, but in terms of a realistic sense, for about 50 cattle, it costs about $2,500 with where costs are today. For me to grow grass. And this is also one of the major benefits that I have. And and in terms of financials, I would reasonably anticipate that I end up making about $100,000 in the next 3 months. I will end up making about $100,000 in the next 3 months, and my income is going upwards, and it's going upwards very quickly. All right, it's going up very quickly. I got a lot of land that I'm farming right now, but this whole thing, right? This whole thing about I don't know how else to put it. I don't know exactly how to put it. But the idea of making drastically more money than effectively everybody, and I've always said that this is a very realistic way to look at it. When I'm in a room full of people, right? When I'm in a room full of people, this is something that I've observed. When I'm in a room full of people, there is a very realistic possibility. Like if I just go into a Costco, if I go into just a random, let's say I go into a Walmart, or I go to a retail store, and we just took 200 people out of that retail store. We just took 200 people out of that Costco or wherever it is. It doesn't matter. Let's just say we took 200 people and we put them all in a room. And I've always said that the whole thing, in terms of a realistic perspective, there is a very honest possibility that I make more money than all 200 of those people combined. And why is that? Because 50% of those people are probably in the negative. All right, 50% of them are probably in the negative. If you legitimately just added it all up together, just took a random 200 people and you just put it all together financially, there is a very realistic possibility that I make more money by myself than all 200 of those people combined. All 200 people combined. There is a very real possibility of that. And this is one of the things that, like me, when I just live my life and, I take a look at it for what it is, and, it just is what it is. I mean, I'm not going to go and be poor, right? Why would I be poor, right? I do very well for myself. Why would I go and be a poor person, right? Why would I do that? I wouldn't, right? Would you do that? I hope not, right? I mean, why would I go and be poor? I do very well for myself, and my financials are on a skyrocketing upwards trajectory, all right? Skyrocketing. I mean, I may end up, my big goal is to do another 1,000% over the next 3 years. That's my big goal, to do another 1,000%. And, the whole thing, with everything, it is what it is, and I give you my perspective on things. And, there are things, money is such a trivial thing. Money is whatever. Money, at the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. What does it matter? I mean, if and money doesn't do anything, right? Money does not do anything. You have to understand this. That's why I put such an emphasis on not being a moron loser, right? Because if you have money and you're a moron loser, you're just a moron loser with money, and you're gonna lose all your money. All right, it just is what it is. I mean, nobody cares. All right, you're gonna die poor. Have fun with that. And the whole, but when I take a look at it, and I've already decided that the thing about it is, like me, I'm not happy about it. I'm not sad about it. I don't feel anything about it. I understand that it is what it is. I do very well for myself, here very realistically, if I just take the money that my business makes and I put it back into my business, I'll end up with probably a 60, 70 cattle, something like that, in the next 3-4 months. I'll probably end up with something like 60 cattle in the next 3, maybe 4 months. And, realistically, if I grow my herd like that, if I grow my herd by 25 animals in the next 3 or 4 months, then, I could leverage against that equity too, and which I probably will, because I've always said that the thing about investing money is that when money gets invested, it's not spent. Money that is invested is not spent. At the end of the day, when you invest capital, the whole reason that you do it is to trade that money for something that is equally as valuable as the money. And the reason that you do that is so that you can make a positive return. All right. And, you can actually do something with the money. The money will actually make you money. And my whole situation with this, and it's like, and the whole thing, I went into this yesterday about when you become poor, you're effectively in a situation where, and, you're effectively going to be poor until the day you die. It's almost a done deal. The big problem with being poor, and even if you're fiddle farting around with being poor and being broke, That's horrendously bad, because eventually, you will end up on the poor side. If you're going from being poor to being broke to being poor to being broke, you're never going from broke to doing better for yourself, right? You're never going from broke to doing exceptionally well for yourself. You're just constantly fiddle farting around. Either you're poor or you're broke. You're one or the other, right? And there's a very realistic possibility that you're flip-flopping between the two, right? And, and the whole thing about it is, like, when I see a poor person, I can legitimately tell you that that person is poor within 30 seconds, right? Within 30 seconds. Why, and it's like the whole thing, and it's like the whole thing about this is that I'm looking to make people aware of this, because it's like, why does it happen on such a large scale, right? I'm not even talking about being broke. I'm talking about legitimately being poor. Like, the idea of being poor in terms of a financial situation is not that you don't have any money. In terms of a because there you can be poor financially, you can be of poor character, you can be of poor moral standards, you can be of poor, anything, right? I mean, poor, it's a microcosmic universe. Being poor is like a microcosmic universe thing, right? It's your entire universe. You don't know anything else other than being poor. I guarantee it. You only know how to be poor. At the end of the day, for whatever reason, you're proud of yourself. You haven't done anything. You don't have any, you don't have anything to show for it. And for whatever reason, you're just whatever, fiddle farting around in La La Land, Disneyland journey time, right? That's where you are, right? And I can tell you, when I see a poor person, I can tell that that person is poor within 30 seconds of communicating with that individual. It's very obvious, right? And the whole thing about not being poor, and being broke, is that you could legitimately go off and be broke instantaneously. Like, you could do that right now if you felt like it, right? If you're poor, you could legitimately, at this very moment, choose to be a broke person instead of being poor. Quit fiddle farting around between being poor and being broke. Just choose to be broke. Quit going, whatever, right? Don't go into debt for ridiculous things, right? Money doesn't do anything. At the end of the day, money does not do anything. Money is negligible. All right, only poor people think that you need money to make money. Only poor people. I guarantee it. If I had $5,000, I could turn that $5,000 into $100,000 with a 100% guarantee. And I could do it in less than 2 years. All right, you don't want to end up poor. You don't want to end up poor. I guarantee it. If you're poor, you're going to die poor. Have fun with that. I don't want to know. I don't want to know why you're poor. I don't. All right, you're poor. It's pathetic. You're going to die poor. If you don't want to be poor, right? How do you financially not become a poor person? I've said in terms of character, the big one is to not complain. Quit complaining, right? Quit throwing a pissy fit, right? Quit complaining. Oh my God, everything's unfair. Oh my God, everything is built for me to fail. Oh my God, nobody makes it. Quit complaining, right? That's the big one in terms of character. But in terms of a financial standard, how do you go out of being poor, right? Stop spending more money than you make. Just make sure that you are at least not going into the negative. It doesn't matter. Oh my God, well, I'm going to go and live my best life. Nobody cares. You're practically homeless. All right. Oh my God, I'm going to go on a trip. I'm going to go on a trip, and I'm going to use my credit card to go on a trip. Right? Nobody cares. Don't go on that trip. All right? When you have money, right? And I've always said that the whole thing about this is that you realistically only, once you have gotten yourself to a point, because being broke, the idea of being broke is that you could legitimately be broke instantaneously. But if you're going to go from being broke to doing well for yourself financially, it will take a minimum of 3 years to get started. Minimum. That's the big idea. It will take you about 3 years to get to the 10% mark. All right? You want to get to the 10% mark, because when you get to the 10% mark, at least you have a fundamental idea of an investment that works out. All right? At least you have an understanding of that. your investment, you have realized, you have come to the conclusion that your investment is not costing you anything, and it's actually maybe even made you a little bit of money. Or even, maybe it went down a little bit, but who cares? Maybe you lost 10% of your money over the next 3 years, but who cares? At least you're learning something, right? At least you're figuring this stuff out. And over the next 3 years, if you legitimately just look at different investment opportunities, the whole thing about this is, as long as you understand how the game is played, you will find something that makes sense. You will find something. It will make sense to you, and then that will be what you invest in, all right? And I'm not saying make sense of gambling, all right? You don't want to be in a situation where you're dumping your money into Bitcoin and just hoping that the Bitcoin goes up, or Fartcoin, or whatever it is. You don't want to be in that situation, all right? You want to look at the investment to make you the return. So when you put your money into the investment itself should be making you the money. Bitcoin does not produce any return. All right? It doesn't produce any return. Right? You're better off buying gold. Gold doesn't produce any return, but at least it is a physical asset that is a commodity. All right? At least it's a commodity. All right? It's a piece of gold. All right? You really need to get into a situation where you have an investment that you understand. If you don't understand an investment, you're never going to make it. I guarantee it. And realistically, if you manage to go from being poor to being broke, even that is a miracle. And you legitimately just stay broke forever, that's not an ideal situation, all right? But it's better than being poor. Once you're broke, over the next 3 years, you should really, really, really focus yourself on learning an investment, figuring out some kind of an investment. It could even be cattle. If you legitimately wanted to get into the cattle business, I showed you how I run my cattle business. You could get to the 10% mark in 3 years. You could get yourself a piece of land. You can get yourself some cattle, right? You can get yourself a lease property. You can herbicide and fertilize the property. You can go and buy yourself some commodity type animals. And even if you just you are relatively successful, even if you just get to the 10% mark, even if you only do that, at least your investment is paying for itself. You're not having to come out of pocket to learn how to do anything. All right? You're learning how the cattle business for free. Right? You don't have to get into the cattle business to make money. There are a lot of ways to make money. The cattle business is not some magical journey. Farming is not some magical journey. Right now, things are very good in the cattle business, and I've always said that the whole thing about this is when people start to complain, everybody will complain at the same time. Eventually, the cattle market will cool down. And then we will be back more into a realistic scenario. And the whole thing about this business is that when I started this business, it was the worst cattle market, one of the worst cattle markets that anyone had ever seen. And that was when I started my business. The price of corn was astronomical. All right. The feeder cattle market was at like 150. It was collapsing because the price of corn was skyrocketing, and that was when I started my cattle business. That was the market that I learned the cattle market in. All right, I was still able to break even on my herd. Right, when I first started my business, and I first started my business with 5 animals, and I raised those 5 animals, I realized that I could break even on my 5 animals. Right? That was how I started. I realized that I could break even on my 5 animals. And when I realized that, I did a little bit, I just kept pushing forward. And now I'm here, right? 375 acres. Business growing by 5-7% a month, maybe even more. But when the cattle market goes, because at the end of the day, and I've put a lot of emphasis on these different ideas. If you don't know how to grow grass, eventually you're going to fail. All right. I would be willing to bet, unless you live in some area where you're right next to a distiller grains plant, you're next to some ethanol plant, and you have massive, thousands and tens of thousands of acres of farmland that you can lease for very cheap. All right, unless you're like in Nebraska, unless you're somewhere like that. All right, unless you're like in Nebraska's the big one. I don't even know where a bunch of South Dakota. I'm pretty sure they got a lot of ethanol plants over there. Unless you're in one of these areas, and you have access to large amounts of land for very, very, very cheap. Unless you're in that, then, if you don't know how to grow grass, you're going to have a very hard time in the cattle business, because the big idea of the feeding cattle feeding business is it's cornered by the massive feed yards. All right, the massive feed yards, the people with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cattle, and they're making like $10 an animal. That's the kind of business that's the kind of business that the cattle feeding market is. All right, the cattle feeding market is not an ideal farming situation for people like me and maybe you. If you're a farmer and you're a small, if you're less than 1,000 acres, something like that, a couple hundred head of cattle, stuff like that. Chances are you're not going to have a whole lot of opportunity in the cattle feeding business, especially if cattle prices start going down. All right, this is also my whole thing about don't buy all of your cattle at the same time. If you buy all of your cattle at the same time, and let's just say, if you want to call it unfortunate, which I don't call it unfortunate, I call it you being an idiot, right? Because I've spoken about this. If you buy all of your cattle at the same time and the cattle market takes a dip, you will effectively, your entire investment portfolio, you will have to fight the current of money. All right, your investment portfolio will be going down in value, even though you are raising the value of your cattle. All right, and I've already, and I gave you my whole thing about this in terms of my business plan. How do I overcome this? I buy into the cattle market very frequently. I do not sell all my cattle at the same time. I do not buy all of my cattle at the same time. I trickle into the markets. If you buy all of your cattle at the same time, have fun being an idiot. All right, you can't even say that you were unfortunate. All right, because you weren't. You were just a ding dong. All right, you shouldn't have bought all your cattle at the same time. The market has three ways that it can go. It can go up, down, and sideways. And if you legitimately sit there and you just hope and pray that the cattle market continues to go up, if that's what you hope and pray for, and if that doesn't happen, then oh my God, everything falls apart, then you're an idiot. You have a 33% chance of succeeding. You're never going to make it. Have fun being poor for the rest of your life. In terms of the cattle feeding business, the cattle feeding business, in terms of just like legitimately just feeding cattle commodity feedstuffs, it's cornered by massive corporations. It's effectively a market that is cornered by people with hundreds of thousands of cattle at a time, tens of thousands of cattle at a time. And if they make $10 an animal, then they're happy with that. All right, if I made $10 an animal, I would be miserable, and I wouldn't touch that business with a 50-foot pole. All right. The grass is where I make my money. Grass is where I make my money. I make a lot of money growing grass. And here in a month, I will be growing grass. And when I enter a situation where the corn market begins to rise, which I believe will happen between now and the next 3 years. At some point between now and the next 3 years, the corn market will start to rise. And when that happens, the feeder cattle market will start to fall, more than likely. At that point, I am going to even look at obtaining more lease property. I will look at obtaining more lease property, but when I see that happening, I can benefit from that by taking my feed costs negative, by baling hay and selling it to a wholesaler.